Marvin, I'd like to bring you up, and I think that it's not just that you head the Shorenstein Center of Press and Policy, it's not just that you are a Murrow professor at Harvard for all these years, that everyone has seen your face between CBS and NBC, and am I missing anything? Fox, Meet the Press. But I think what's important is that you have been a leader in merging press and policy, and the two are intertwined. And the question one always asks is what pushes what? Does press move policy? Does policy move press? Are we just pawns in the process? These are questions that we're always mulling over as journalists. Without much ado, I'd like to bring you up to talk and elaborate about our deep dilemmas that we encounter today in journalism.
Thank you very much, Felice. I am a great fan of the media line, so let that be noted from the very beginning. What I want to say, I think, will have to take us back a couple of years. In May of 1957, I was a graduate student at Harvard. I was intent on a PhD in Russian history. I had just come from spending a year at the American Embassy in Moscow. I learned the language very well. I was a kind of junior press officer at the American Embassy. I translated the Soviet press. I sharpened Ambassador Boland's pencil. I did anything they wanted. And I was thrilled with the assignment, because what it meant is that at the height of the Cold War, I was able as a student of Russian history to see it, to feel it, to talk to Russians all over the country. And when I came back, I went back up to Harvard intent on finishing my degree. And in May, I got a call, and Felice has already given the story away. I got a call from Ed Murrow. He called twice that day. The first day that he called, a librarian came to me. I was a Widener library, and she said, "Marvin, there's a guy on the phone. He says he's Edward R. Murrow. Would you talk to him, please?" And I said, "Edward R. Murrow is not calling me. Hang up on him. He's obviously a nut. Forget it." And she came back at about 5 in the afternoon, and she said, "He's called again, and I really think you ought to talk to him." Curious, I picked myself up, picked up the phone. The minute I heard his voice, I realized what a total jackass I was. How could you play games with Ed Murrow? And he said, "I just read the article that you had in the Times last week. I liked it very much. I'd like you to come down and talk to me about Russia." "Yes, sir," I said. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? "Yes, sir, I'll be there." And as I was going in, his secretary, Kate Campbell, said, "Remember, he's a very busy man, a half hour, and that's it." I said, "Yes, ma'am, half hour." 3 hours later, the meeting ended, and it took that long because Murrow was intensely interested in the story. He wanted to know what was going on in Russia. He wanted to know about Nikita Khrushchev. Who is this guy? What does he want? Will he settle? For what? And I answered as best I could. Toward the end, Murrow said to me, "How would you like to work for CBS?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I've never been a reporter. I've never been a broadcaster. I don't know if I can do it." Oh, he said, "Sure. Not hard at all." He said, "Let's drink to that." And he took out from his drawer a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label Scotch, and he put 2 large glasses there. This is about 11 in the morning. And he began to pour, and he looked at me, and there must have been a look on my face of absolute shock and horror. And he said, "You don't drink." I said, "No, does that mean there's no job?" He said, "No, but it does make things that much more difficult." But he did offer the job. I did accept, and I stayed at CBS for 24 years, and then 7 years at NBC before accepting a job of starting the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School. I happen to think that that period of time, having nothing to do with me, coincident with that period of time, was the golden age of American journalism, as we know it today. It was a time that was not only inspired by people like Murrow, but we were in the middle of the Cold War. It was a great story. We all knew that we had to understand what was going on in the Soviet Union and what was in Nikita Khrushchev's head and Leonid Brezhnev. And when we read about the horrible things going on in a communist system of government, we wanted to know more about it. And when I had an opportunity to go up to Harvard to start the center, I really grabbed it for two reasons. One, the concept of trying to study the way in which the media influences public policy, and the way, in fact, there can be in our current environment no public policy without the infusion of a vibrant press. The two go together. Unless you understand that, you're missing the point of the way in which we govern ourselves. And at that point, I was saying to myself, thinking back, what was it about those years, those 30, 40 years? And I keep going back to one point. We were absorbed in a major issue. We wanted to survive the threat, the challenge of communism, and we did. And communism was the thing that collapsed, not capitalism. So what happens now if that battle has, in a sense, been won? Where do we turn today? And what's interesting is that Russia is coming back into the picture. And given the nature of American politics, it is back in a big way into how we govern ourselves, what is the role of a president in terms of a Russia connection, if there is one. I happen to think there is, but that's irrelevant to where I'm going. I feel that we are now faced with another very large challenge compounded by two elements having to do with journalism. The first has to do with money, old-fashioned ingredient, money. Where do you get it to do the best that you can in journalism? I remember that when I was covering the plot to kill the Pope, Pope John Paul II, and we were in Rome. I was at NBC at that time. I had two camera crews. I was there as the correspondent, and the man who shot the Pope was a man named Mehmet Ali Agca, and his mother lived in the eastern corner of Turkey. And one morning I get up and I said to myself, I am determined to get to that village today. I've got to talk to her today. Why today? Who knows? In my mind, I had to see her today. And what did I do? I chartered a plane. And I took the cruise, and we flew to the eastern end of Turkey, and we got the interview. I never had to check with NBC. I, on my own, did that. It cost many thousands of dollars. That was a time still when Mr. Topping, one of my great friends, I just saw him. That was the time still when the quest for news was so central to the network that if you had to spend the money, you spent it, but you got the story. That was the key. That is over, finished, forget it. Now every single news program goes with a person who manages the budget. And you've got to be very clear about where you're going to get the money, how are you going to spend it, why are you going to spend it. You've got to check with somebody who is not a journalist. But you've got to check with that person nonetheless, and very often that person will say, no, it is too expensive. So you have that kind of constraint on the quest for journalism. Above and beyond that, we now have the internet. The internet has had a profound impact on all of journalism. Everywhere you turn today, the idea of the internet is central to the way in which we get information and the way in which we communicate with one another. And that has, in my opinion, coarsened what was once a beautiful, honest pursuit of fact. Today, we live at a time when money and technology will end up determining what is on the air or what is published. I'm not saying that this is for all stories, and I'm not saying this is an every single day factor, but it's there. And journalists today are aware of it. And the amazing thing to me is that despite that, we are still producing some of the best young journalists around. It is a marvel for me. I see them. I'm with the Felice Center in Washington. At the Felice Center, we have a group of about 20 young people there with us at all times. But there are groups coming in, and I'm amazed. They are the same as I remember from the old days. But they're going to have to function in today's environment. So how do you do that? How do you put into their heads that there is something still beautiful about the quest for knowledge, fact, information? How do we get along in the world at all if we don't have the fact to back up our judgment of what's going on? So I end up, even with the pressures of the money and the pressures of the internet and the new technology and social media and all of that stuff, I still end up on the optimistic side because I see these young people come in every day and they're terrific. And they're going to carry the load. It's much more difficult for them now than it was for me in my time. But somehow or another, I'm absolutely persuaded that they're going to do it. They're going to pull it off, and we're all going to be the better for it. I could go on, actually, for another 40 minutes, but I am told to knock it off at the show. Thank you very, very much.